The siren was off. But the town could still hear the cruiser coming, tires whispering over the damp asphalt as the last of the drizzle slid into gutters, and the sky turned that soft, honeyed gold that makes everything look calmer than it really is. The car rolled to a stop at the curb in front of the little grocery store. And for a moment, all anyone saw was the reflection of red and blue on wet pavement and the silhouette of a man inside, shoulders square, jaw clenched. The door swung open with a hollow metallic thud, and Rex dropped to the ground in one smooth motion, harness snug across his chest, nails clicking against the concrete, nose already working the air. He was all disciplined muscle and quiet focus, the kind of dog that made people feel safer, even if they didn't know why. And as he scanned the sidewalk, his gaze snagged, unblinking, on the tiny figure standing half behind an older woman near the newspaper stand. Mia's bright red sweater was too thin for the chill lingering after the rain. She clutched a worn stuffed dog by its ear, the fur matted into hard little clumps from tears and constant holding. Officer Grant's voice cut through the street like a knife, sharp and too loud for such a small town corner. "You can't just ignore calls from the station, ma'am. That's not how this works." Her aunt, eyes ringed with the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep alone, lifted her chin and tried to sound steady, but her words shook. "She doesn't want to go with you. She's scared. Can't you see that?" Grant scoffed, a humorless huff through his nose, and stepped closer, the leather of his duty belt creaking, the smell of coffee and sweat and rain mixing with the faint detergent scent of Mia's sweater as he reached out. "Scared of what?" he snapped. "I'm here to help. You want more trouble?" His hand closed around Mia's small forearm, not quite a yank, but firm, bruising firm, the kind of grip that says there is no choice here. The world seemed to contract to that one contact point. Mia's stuffed dog tumbled from her fingers and hit a shallow puddle with a soft splash, dark water creeping into its fabric belly. Somewhere down the block, a door chime rang as someone stepped out to see what the shouting was about, and an engine idled at a stop sign, waiting. Rex, who had sat at heel the entire time, ears swiveling, took one step forward, then another, his body lowering, weight shifting, a low vibration starting in his chest that only those closest could hear. Grant didn't look back. He tugged Mia closer, her eyes flooding, breath coming in panicked little gasps that smelled like fear and rain and something Rex had been trained to recognize. In that split second, the canine's training, instincts, and something deeper than either collided. Muscles coiled, lips peeled back just enough to flash white. And Rex exploded into motion, not wild, not confused, but with terrifying precision. He launched past Mia's shoulder and clamped down on Grant's forearm, where the hand gripped the child, teeth closing through fabric and flesh. A controlled, unshakable vice. Grant's shout tore down the street, high and raw. As he stumbled backward, arm twisted, Mia wrenched free. The aunt screamed, "Oh my God!" as shoppers froze mid-step, a plastic bag dropping and spilling oranges that rolled across wet concrete. Phones came up in an instant, screens glowing, people filming as the holy, untouchable image of Officer and K9 shattered in front of them, the dog not attacking a suspect, not chasing a fleeing criminal, but turning on his own handler in broad daylight, body planted between a trembling little girl in a red sweater and the man who was supposed to protect her. The week before everything blew open, the town wore its usual disguise of calm. A thin gray sky pulled low over the rooftops and the smell of wet pavement and old coffee drifting out of the only diner on Main Street, where the early regulars sat like fixtures, veterans in faded jackets nursing chipped mugs. Inside, the clink of ceramic and the low murmur of voices blended with the soft squeak of rubber soles as the waitress moved between tables. But near the door, by the window, one presence was coiled and silent. Rex, stretched out at Officer Grant's boots, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but never truly asleep. His harness lay beside him on the floor, a bundle of straps and buckles that, once clipped on, turned him from companion into weapon. But for now, he was off duty. Still, every time the door chimed and the outside air rolled in, Rex's ears flicked, nostrils flaring, cataloging scents: rain, exhaust, bread. Across the street, at the crosswalk where the paint had started to peel, Mia hesitated on the curb, small fingers wrapped tight around her aunt's hand. Her red sweater was like a flare against the washed-out street, the yarn pilled at the sleeves where she had twisted it too many times. She didn't bounce or skip like kids her age. She stood very still, chin tucked down, shoulders hunched whenever a truck rolled past. Rex's head came up 1 inch, then another, until he was no longer pretending to rest at all. He stared through the glass, pupils narrowing, body going oddly still in that way his trainer used to point out as a tell. The moment he locked onto something that didn't fit. The bell above the diner door jingled as a man stepped out, pushing his cap back, a retired sergeant whose spine still held a parade ground straightness. He paused to light a cigarette and followed Rex's line of sight. That's when he saw her. The little girl in red, frozen at the crosswalk like a deer at the tree line, knuckles white around her aunt's hand. A car radio down the block blasted a burst of angry talk, a male voice rising in a sharp bark of frustration. And Mia flinched so hard her whole body jumped, shoulders to ears, breath catching. The aunt squeezed her hand, whispered something. But even across the street you could see the way Mia tried to make herself smaller. Rex gave a low, almost inaudible whine and shifted his weight forward until his chest pressed against the glass, as if some part of him was already trying to cross that street. The veteran watched the dog, then the girl, and something old stirred in his gut. That prickle he'd felt before things went bad overseas. The sense that danger wasn't always loud, that sometimes it lived in a child's too quiet eyes, while the only one really paying attention was a dog who wouldn't look away, waiting and watching. The house looked even smaller under the pulsing wash of red and blue, its peeling paint catching the lights like old scars. And the air carried that uneasy stillness that settles over a neighborhood when people hear something they don't want to admit they heard. Silhouettes gathered behind half-closed blinds, and a few neighbors stood in the shadows near their porches, arms crossed, whispering into each other's shoulders, but staying planted exactly where fear told them to remain. Officer Grant stepped out of the cruiser with the heavy, self-assured gait of someone who had done this routine 100 times, calling it a welfare check, as if the phrase alone made everything simple, while Rex hopped down after him. But the second the canine's paws hit the cracked walkway, something in his posture sharpened. Ears locked forward, nose cutting through the night air as though scent alone told him more truth than the report on the radio ever could. The aunt opened the door with trembling hands, trying to push her hair behind her ear like she hadn't been crying, insisting in that brittle, glass-thin voice that, "Everything is fine, officer. Just a misunderstanding." But the smell of fresh fear clung to the hallway walls, and Rex felt it before anyone said a word. Grant walked in without waiting for permission, boots thudding over warped floorboards, scanning the living room with an air of bored formality. But Rex didn't follow the same path. He veered left as if pulled by a magnet, stopping in front of the couch where Mia sat curled into herself, eyes swollen and raw around the edges. She didn't speak, didn't run, didn't even look up until Rex lowered his massive head beside her knee. And then she moved, barely, a trembling little hand slipping into the thick fur along his neck, fingers hiding between the strands like she was touching something sacred, something safe, something that wasn't going to hurt her for telling the truth. A soft rumble built in Rex's throat, not loud enough to be called a growl by anyone who didn't know dogs, but deep enough to mean stay back. His body angled, not toward any threat inside the house, but against Grant, placing himself like a living barrier between Mia and the very man wearing the uniform. Grant waved off the aunt's stammering explanations, muttering that kids cry, neighbors overreact, and nothing here rises to the level of concern, his tone carrying that performative calm that hides impatience. And something else, if you listen closely. The veteran neighbor, standing in the doorway with arms folded, watched the entire exchange with tightening concern. He saw the aunt's haunted eyes, the girl's silent pleading, the way Rex's hackles raised only when Grant stepped closer. And he felt that familiar knot in his gut, the one that said something was wrong long before the paperwork would ever admit it. Yet within minutes, Grant declared the scene resolved, shrugged at the neighbors who pretended they weren't listening, and filed it under nothing to see here, shutting the door on a house that still shook with unspoken fear, while Rex lingered one extra second, staring back at Mia as though promising he hadn't given up, even if everyone else already had. The station at night felt like a different building, fluorescent lights humming overhead and bouncing off scuffed linoleum, washing everything in a sickly pale that made tired faces look harder, sharper. In that glare, Officer Grant leaned against a row of lockers, trading laughter with another patrolman whose grin didn't quite reach his eyes. "Kids these days don't listen unless you make an example," Grant said, the words wrapped in a chuckle just light enough to pass for a joke. But there was a cold edge underneath that his partner heard and chose to ignore. They talked about respect and discipline, and how some parents were too soft. And the other officer muttered something about paperwork, about how Grant always seemed to make problems go away. At their feet, Rex lay on the cooled tile beside Grant's locker, eyes half closed, but his ears stayed pricked, tracking every shift in tone, every nearby footstep, every locker door slam that sent echoes down the hall. From the squad room floated the familiar talk. Grant gets results, takes the calls nobody wants, knows how to shut down trouble before it blows up. The compliments sounded like praise, but landed like warnings if you listened from the right angle, because under every approving nod, there was an unspoken line. He does the dirty work, so no one has to ask how. Somewhere in the building, complaints with his name on them lay in drawers or misfiled folders, stories retold as misunderstandings or overreactions by people scared enough to call for help but not powerful enough to be believed. While that narrative hardened inside the station, a different story flickered in the dim kitchen of a small house across town, where Mia's aunt stood over a smoking pan, dinner charred at the edges because her hands were shaking so badly she'd forgotten to turn down the heat. The phone on the counter lit up her face as she hovered over a contact. Someone she trusted once, maybe a lawyer, maybe a relative. Thumb poised to press call. Instead, she stared at the screen, swallowed hard, and erased the message she had typed. "He said if I talk, they'll take her." The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavier than the smoke curling toward the ceiling. Mia sat at the table in her red sweater, drawing circles on a napkin, pretending she didn't hear the aunt's ragged breathing. Back at the station, Rex suddenly lifted his head, an uneasy whine curling out of him as he rose and padded toward a closed office door. Behind it, Grant sat with a local councilman in a too-tight suit, voices low and cordial, trading phrases like keeping things quiet and we'll handle it internally. The dog stood there, staring at the barrier, tail still, hair along his spine raised, as if he could sense that danger didn't wear a mask in the alley. It wore a thick smile in the office and shook hands in the hallway where complaints went to die. The change started small, the kind of thing only someone really watching would notice. But it grew louder every time Mia and Rex found themselves in the same stretch of town. At the community fair 3 days later, under strings of faded pennant flags and the sugary smell of cotton candy and fried dough, kids lined up to take pictures with a hero dog, parents nudging them forward with their phones ready. Rex endured the first few with patient professionalism, sitting when told, letting tiny hands pat his back and tug gently at his ears. But his eyes kept drifting past the camera flashes and balloon stands to a patch of grass near the edge of the crowd where Mia lingered with her aunt, half hidden behind a food truck. She wore the same red sweater despite the mild weather. Sleeves bunched around her fists, gaze fixed on the ground as laughter and music washed over her without sinking in. When one boy wrapped his arms too tightly around Rex's neck, the canine gave a soft huff and stepped away, ignoring Grant's sharp whistle. Instead of circling back to the kids, he threaded through the forest of knees and stroller wheels until he emerged beside Mia. He didn't bark or paw or demand attention. He simply stopped, squared himself in front of her, and stared up into her face with an intensity that made her aunt fall silent mid-sentence. Mia froze at first, eyes wide, then hesitantly let go of her aunt's sleeve, fingers trembling as she reached out. They hovered over his collar, hovering like she was afraid even this would be taken from her. And when she finally made contact, pressing her palm lightly against the leather strap and the warmth of his neck underneath, it was like exhaling after holding her breath for days. Rex leaned into that touch almost imperceptibly, a slow, deliberate shift of weight as his eyelids drooped halfway, and a quiet exhale left his body. Not the panting release of a dog tired from play, but the low, satisfied sound of a protector finding the exact person he was meant to stand beside. Grant called his name, again irritation creeping into his tone, but Rex acted as if he hadn't heard, body anchored to Mia's side by something older than training and deeper than command. Somewhere behind that moment, like a film cutting to archived footage, the past flickered. A younger Rex in a sterile training facility, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, handlers in uniform watching from behind glass, as volunteers and role players cycled through scenarios. They'd pipe in recordings of arguments, slam doors, simulate domestic disputes. Heart rates spiked, cortisol rose, and each time Rex was told to find the problem, to move through a room crowded with people and lock onto the one whose internal world was screaming the loudest. He excelled, nose twitching as he followed invisible trails of stress, stopping in front of shaking hands, tear-bright eyes, clenched jaws, earning praise for his uncanny ability to find vulnerability like a beacon. "He's like a living lie detector," one early handler had said, scratching his ears. "He always finds the one who needs him most." Now, in the fairground noise, that same instinct was doing its job, tugging him away from the safe, smiling kids and toward the quiet girl whose body language whispered danger in a language only he seemed willing to listen to. To the casual observer, it might have looked like disobedience, a stubborn dog ignoring his handler to sulk by a random child. But if you knew what he'd been bred and built to do, you'd see it for what it really was. Rex running his own kind of welfare check, sensing in Mia's flinches and too careful movements the same storm his training had taught him to flag. He wasn't breaking protocol. He was following the oldest one imprinted in his bones. Protect the vulnerable, even when everyone else pretends they're fine. By the time the call came in, the sky over town had turned the color of bruised steel. Storm clouds rolling over each other in slow, heavy waves as the wind funneled down Main Street, slapping loose signs against brick walls in a jittery rhythm that made the whole place feel on edge. Grant flicked his eyes at the dispatch screen. Child not cooperating. School trouble. The kind of vague, lazy phrasing that could mean anything or nothing. But the tone in the dispatcher's voice made it sound pre-packaged, like someone had already decided what the story was going to be. The cruiser's headlights cut a tunnel through the dark as they pulled up to Mia's house again, the peeling paint now slick with the first fingers of rain, and behind curtains neighbors' faces appeared and vanished. Watching the glow of lights flicker inside the small home, as if afraid to admit they were doing it. On the porch, Rex jumped down from the back seat, but instead of bounding up the steps like he usually did, he stopped short at the base of them, paws planted, ears pinned back flat against his skull, nose lifting to taste the air that seeped from the cracked front door. Fear, fresh and sharp, layered over stale detergent and the bitter tang of burnt food. Grant jerked his head toward the entrance, expecting Rex at his heel. But the dog didn't move. Muscles taut, nails scraping slightly as he braced. It took a sharp, clipped command and a hard look over the shoulder to make him break his stance and climb the steps, each one taken as though he was walking into a place he knew he didn't want to be. Inside, the air was thick enough to chew, windows rattling with the first rumble of thunder as Mia's aunt stood near the kitchen doorway, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt, eyes shiny with the kind of tears a person fights back because they know crying won't help. Mia was not in sight at first, and that, more than anything, told the truth. It took Rex all of 2 seconds to locate her scent and track it to the living room, where she knelt wedged behind the couch, red sweater dull in the lamplight, clutching the worn stuffed dog so hard its seams creaked. Grant's voice floated through the small space, calm as a blade laid flat on a table. "Look," he said, stepping slowly into the room. "We've had reports. School says she's acting out, not following directions. You're one report away from someone higher up deciding you can't handle her." The words were smooth, almost gentle, but there was a chill beneath them that made the aunt's shoulders fold inward. "I'm trying," she whispered, voice cracking. "She's scared. She doesn't like when authority shows up," he cut in with a thin smile. "That's exactly the problem. You don't want her taken, do you? Then you cooperate with me. You let me live my way." As he moved closer to the couch, Rex shifted, body sliding between the officer and the narrow gap where Mia hid. His stance low but rock solid, tail straight, head slightly down in that professional ready position. A sound rolled up from deep in his chest. Not a wild snarl, but a quiet, measured growl. The sound of a warning given by someone who knows exactly what they can do if forced. Grant's jaw tightened. He shot the dog a sideways glare, annoyance flaring because this was not how canines were supposed to act in front of civilians. Mia's aunt looked from the officer to the dog, to the trembling fingers peeking out from behind Rex's flank, where Mia's hand had crept forward to bury itself in his fur. And something shifted in her gaze. Terror, yes, but also the dawning, desperate realization that the only creature in the room whose behavior matched the danger she felt was the one on 4 legs. In that cramped living room, with the storm pressing against the windows and the threat of losing her niece hanging unspoken in the air, Rex became the first honest thing in the room, his growl saying what no one else would. "This is not right, and I will not move." The next day, when the storm clouds had wrung themselves out and left the town washed but not clean, the veteran sat at his small kitchen table staring at his coffee, as if the swirling dark surface might offer answers. Instead, it only replayed images from the night before. Rex refusing the porch, Mia's hunched little body behind the couch, the way Grant's voice had stayed so calm while everyone else visibly shook. He'd spent a lifetime learning to listen to the gut feeling that shows up before the shooting starts. And now that same instinct clawed at him so hard, he finally pushed back his chair, went to an old shoebox in his closet, and pulled out a worn business card. From years ago. The ink slightly faded. An old contact in social services who had once told him, "If something smells off, call me before it goes bad." He did. The voice on the other end was older, more tired, but still sharp. When he gave Grant's name, there was a pause, too long to be nothing. "Hold on," the contact said, fingers clicking over a keyboard. The silence that followed felt like being back in a bunker, waiting for someone to confirm what you already knew. "There are past reports," the voice said at last, choosing each word like stepping stones over a minefield. "A few years back, concerns about his conduct on calls involving minors. Internal review claimed no policy violations. One complainant's file is flagged as resolved due to juvenile relocation." The veteran frowned. "Relocation?" Another pause. "The child allegedly ran away before she could testify," the contact murmured. Case was closed. "There's also a note here suggesting someone upstairs wanted it handled quietly, given his performance record." The vet's stomach dropped. He'd heard that phrase before in a dozen different uniforms. It never meant justice, only convenience. Across town, as he scribbled down the case numbers on a scrap of envelope, Mia sat on the edge of her bed, legs dangling, hands twisting the ear of her stuffed dog until the seam pulled. Her aunt knelt in front of her, trying to braid her hair with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. "Sweetheart," she whispered, voice thin, "you can tell me if something's wrong when he comes around, okay? You can tell me anything." For a long moment, Mia just stared at the floor, lips pressed so tight they turned white. Then, without looking up, she breathed, "He comes when no one else is looking." The words were soft but heavy, dropping into the room like stones. The aunt's hand stilled, braid half finished. "Who does, baby?" she asked, even though some part of her already knew. "The officer," Mia whispered, as if the title itself might make him materialize. "He says he's checking if I'm being good. He hurts my feelings with his hands." She didn't have the vocabulary for what he did or tried to do. She only had those small, devastating phrases that folded all the horror into something her 7-year-old mind could hold. "He says I'll be taken away if I talk." The aunt felt something in her chest tear clean down the middle. Terror roaring up like fire, rage like ice wrapping around her spine. She hugged Mia so tight the girl squeaked, then pulled back, fumbling for her phone with shaking fingers. This time, she hit record before dialing the station, the red dot blinking like a tiny lifeline on the screen as the rings ticked by. A receptionist with a sweet, practiced tone answered. And when the aunt haltingly tried to explain, tried to say the words inappropriate, frightened, "He comes alone," the voice on the other end slid into the same syrupy script. "Ma'am, I'm sure you're misinterpreting officer discipline. He's trained to be firm for the child's own good. We'd strongly advise you not to make any false claims. That can have serious consequences for custody evaluations." Every syllable turned the knife. "So you're not going to log this?" the aunt rasped, recording still running. "We'll note your concerns," the woman replied, in a way that clearly meant they wouldn't. "But making accusations like that can complicate things for you. Best to cooperate and avoid trouble." When the call ended, the recording saved with a soft click, but the silence that followed was anything but soft. The line was dead, and something in the aunt felt dead with it. A door slamming on the last fragile hope that the system would protect them. She set the phone down, breathing hard, tears finally spilling over, and glanced at the front door as if expecting it to open at any second. In that small, suffocating room, with Mia's confession echoing and the sugar-coated warning still hissing in her ear, one truth settled like lead. No one in power was coming to save them. The only ones who believed the danger were a terrified child, her breaking aunt, and a dog who growled when the badge walked through the door. The morning after the storm, the town woke to streets scrubbed clean, puddles glinting like broken glass in the pale sun. But beneath the shine, the air felt wrong, too thin, too quiet, as if everyone was holding a breath they couldn't name. Outside the small neighborhood grocery where Mia's aunt worked, the faded open sign swung in a lazy circle, squeaking softly each time the wind nudged it, and the smell of coffee and overripe bananas drifted through the automatic doors. Inside, the day should have been ordinary. An old man comparing soup cans, a young mom wrestling a toddler into a cart, the familiar ding of the register. Instead, the moment the black and white cruiser rolled into the lot and the engine cut, a nervous current ran through the aisles. The veteran neighbor, grabbing milk, felt his spine stiffen when he saw who stepped out. Officer Grant adjusted his belt with one hand, the other brushing casually, almost thoughtlessly, near his holster. A gesture he had probably repeated 1,000 times, but which now looked like a reminder. This is who has power here. The passenger door opened with a metallic thunk, and Rex hopped down, harness already clipped, the canine patch stark against his side. From a distance, he looked like the same disciplined working dog everyone had admired at parades and school visits. But if you watched closely, you'd see it. His ears not just alert, but wired tight. Nostrils sampling the air with sharp, decisive pulls. Body leaning instinctively toward the sliding doors, as though pulled by an invisible line that smelled like fear and cereal dust and a little girl's shampoo. Mia's aunt froze as the chime above the entrance rang, and Grant stepped in, his presence cutting the store's buzz like a blade through fabric. "Morning," he called, loud enough for every shopper within 20 feet to hear, voice coded in official politeness. "Got a call from school again. Seems someone's been skipping out." He let the words "skipping out" hang in the air, heavy and blaming, then turned that flat smile on the aunt, who was stocking shelves in the cereal aisle, hands shaking so badly a box slipped and tumbled to the floor. Behind a tower of cartoon mascots promising fun and sugar, Mia crouched, clutching her stuffed dog to her chest, the red of her sweater peeking through the gap between boxes like a distress flare. The veteran, pretending to read a label, watched Grant's hand hover just a little too long over his holster, not quite touching, but close enough to be seen, close enough to say without saying, "Remember who you're talking to." "Bring her out," Grant ordered, the warmth gone from his tone, leaving only steel. "I'm not going to ask twice. We can do this the easy way, or we can make it official, and I don't think you want that on your record, do you?" The aunt's eyes filled, torn between the urge to shield Mia and the terror of what would happen if she refused. She stepped aside, voice barely working as she called, "Mia, honey, come here." Mia didn't move, knuckles white around her stuffed dog's matted ear. In the parking lot, Rex had paused just outside the doors, the glass reflecting his own tense form back at him. But what held him wasn't his reflection. It was the sound riding the air-conditioned breeze, Mia's breathing, fast and shallow, and the tremor in the aunt's voice. Something in him, built from 1,000 training drills and a bone-deep instinct older than any badge, clicked over. No more. Grant, frustrated now, stalked down the aisle, boots heavy, pushing past a cart and a startled shopper, eyes zeroing in on that flash of red behind the cereal. "Enough," he muttered, reaching around the display. His fingers closed around Mia's forearm in that same disciplined grip, thumb digging into tender skin, yanking her up and out like she was contraband instead of a child. The stuffed dog slipped from her grasp, hitting the linoleum with a dull slap as Mia gasped, "Please don't!" But before she could finish, before the aunt could do more than shout his name, the store filled with a sound that didn't come from any human throat. A sharp, explosive bark that cut through every other noise, followed by the thunder of claws on tile. Rex's entire body became a projectile of muscle and intent as he surged down the aisle, harness straps straining, eyes locked not on Mia, not on random shoppers, but on the exact point where Grant's flesh met the child's arm. In one controlled surgical movement, he launched, jaws snapping shut around Grant's forearm with terrifying precision, teeth sinking through uniform fabric into the meat beneath. Not shredding, not flailing, but holding like a vice. Grant screamed, a raw, high sound ripped from somewhere he kept hidden, his grip on Mia breaking as he stumbled backward into a display, sending boxes cascading in a cardboard waterfall. Mia fell against the shelves, free, scrambling away on hands and knees as Rex planted himself between her and the officer, growl rumbling like distant thunder. Gasps and shouts erupted from every angle. A jar shattered on the floor. Someone cried, "Oh my God!" And in an instant, half a dozen phones were up, red recording dots blinking as the sacred image of Officer and K9 United shattered on camera. They watched, stunned, as the town's hero dog turned on his own handler. Not in confusion, not in random violence, but in a clear, purposeful act of protection, choosing the trembling girl in the red sweater over the man who wore the badge. The clip hit the internet like a spark in dry grass, the first version shaky and vertical, captioned breathlessly, "Police dog attacks handler, then this happens." And at first, people clicked for the shock value alone, expecting chaos and blood and a dog gone rogue. What they got instead, once the grainy footage steadied, was far quieter and far more damning. The bite lasted mere seconds on screen. Rex surging forward, jaws clamping down on Grant's forearm, cereal boxes exploding around them. But the part that lodged in everyone's throat came right after, when the officer's grip on Mia broke, and she stumbled backward into the corner of the aisle, hands flying to her ears like she could shut out the whole world. The camera, still rolling, caught her rocking slightly, eyes squeezed shut, voice thin and cracking as she chanted, "Don't let him take me again. Please don't let him take me. Please don't let him take me." The words tumbling over one another in a panic that made the fluorescent-lit groceries suddenly feel like a crime scene. In front of her, Rex planted his paws on the slick tile, body forming a solid wall of fur and muscle. Hackles raised, every line of him screaming, "You'll go through me first." He didn't snap at bystanders, didn't lunge at anyone else. He just held that line between Mia and the man in the uniform, a living shield, with his teeth still bared. The veteran neighbor, who had been there watching the whole thing unfold in real time, went home with his hands still shaking, heart pounding not from fear, but from the white-hot clarity that this was the moment no one could ignore. He transferred the video from his phone to his old laptop, eyes burning as he typed out a description that didn't pull punches, then did something most people in town would never have thought to do. He attached scanned copies of the old case numbers and summaries. His contact in social services had risked sending him the relocation note about the child who conveniently ran away, the quietly shelved concerns about Grant's conduct. He hit upload, And within hours the clip was being shared not just by locals, but by strangers who could sense, even through a screen, that this was about more than a dog bite. At the station, the fallout started as nervous joking and muttered curses. But one man didn't laugh. A junior officer, still new enough that his badge felt heavy, who had been swallowing doubts about Grant for months every time a report didn't match the bruises he saw, every time a complaint disappeared. Watching the video on his monitor, seeing Mia's terror and Rex's unwavering stance, his own denial snapped. Hands trembling, he opened a secure email and reached out to an external investigative unit whose name he'd scribbled down during a training seminar and never expected to use, attaching everything he'd quietly collected. Short, accidentally trimmed body cam snippets where Grant's audio cut out at key moments, internal emails nudging supervisors to back our guy despite red flags, a formal complaint from a parent that had somehow never made it into the official database. When the investigators arrived days later, they didn't stop for coffee or small talk. They came in suits and plain sedans, carrying laptops and hard drives, their faces unreadable as they set up in a borrowed conference room. They watched the grocery store footage frame by frame, zooming in on Mia's flinch, on the way Rex oriented his body, on the casual menace in Grant's posture. They cross-referenced dates with the dusty reports the veteran had unearthed, with the junior officer's hidden cache. Then they sat in on a recorded interview in a child-safe room painted in soft colors, where Mia sat in her red sweater in a small chair. Rex curled at her feet with his head resting gently across her sneakers, his presence turning her shaky whispers into words that could finally be heard. As she spoke in those same simple, devastating phrases, the investigators' notes changed. This was no longer about a single incident or an overreactive K9, no longer a viral oddity to be spun away. The pattern was there, ugly and undeniable. A man shielded by his badge, a system that smoothed over complaints, and a dog who had done the one thing no one else with authority had been willing to do: interrupt the abuse in public and force the world to look. It didn't happen overnight. But when it finally came, justice moved with a heavy, undeniable weight. Like a long-delayed storm that had finally decided to break over the people who thought they were untouchable. The first image seared into memory was Grant being led out of the station he once strode through like a king, his wrists cuffed in front of him, no mirrored sunglasses to hide behind, no swagger left in his gait. Just a man whose power had collapsed, shoulders hunched as cameras clicked and someone shouted, "Do you have anything to say to her?" He didn't answer. The veteran watched from across the street, arms folded. Rex's old K9 unit photo still visible on a bulletin board inside as the door swung shut behind the fallen officer. In quick, almost surgical cuts, the montage widened. A councilman in that too-tight suit stepping down for personal reasons, face gray as the news anchor quietly mentioned conflict of interest concerns. A supervisor at the station, the one whose signature had appeared at the bottom of too many no policy violation found memos. Sitting stiff in an interview room as an external investigator slid a stack of complaints across the table, each page a small indictment, each ignored bruise now a line in a potential charge. Some of them tried to slink away with quiet resignations and statements about wanting to spend more time with family. But others were publicly named in sharp font headlines that finally said what the town had been whispering for years. This wasn't one bad apple. It was a tree with roots rotten in the dark. While that played out, Mia and her aunt were moved into a safe place under protective custody. A small apartment with white walls and a lock that clicked solidly into place. The first night, the aunt woke 3 times thinking she heard a cruiser pulling up. But each time, the only sound was the hum of the fridge and Mia's soft breathing from the next room. Slowly, her shoulders lowered from around her ears, her hands shook less when she poured juice. And she started to believe, piece by fragile piece, that the next knock at the door wouldn't be him. In another quiet room, far from the chatter of news crews, Rex's fate was decided not by rumor or rage, but by people willing to look at the evidence. He sat on the floor beside a handler from the investigative unit, tail tapping lightly as they reviewed the grocery footage and expert assessments. This wasn't a rogue attack, one investigator stated, voice steady. Look at his positioning. Look where his focus stays. He engages only when the child is restrained and immediately reorients to protect her. This is textbook protective response, not loss of control. The panel members nodded, some visibly relieved. And when the final decision came, Rex would not be destroyed, would not be written off as dangerous and discarded. The handler scratched his neck and murmured, "Told you, buddy. You did good." Weeks later, under a sky so blue it almost felt like it was trying to make up for all the gray, Rex trotted up a new front walk, the gravel crunching under his paws. His collar was softer now, a simple band without a police patch. Just his name and a tag that chimed faintly with each step. The house was modest, but the grass out front was green and the curtains were open, sunlight spilling out. The door swung wide before they even reached it. And there she was, Mia, in her favorite red sweater, the one that had been there for every awful moment. And now, finally, for something good. Her eyes blew wide, then lit from within like someone had switched on a light in a dark room. "Rex?" she whispered, the word half breath, half laugh. He broke into a bounding run, and then, at the last second, slowed, as if remembering she was small, gently leaning his weight into her instead of knocking her over. She wrapped her arms around his neck, face buried in his fur, and for the first time in a long time, her tears were made of relief. The camera pulled back on that image. One girl, one dog, a simple doorway, and the narrator's voice settled over it like a promise. The system failed her. The town looked away, and those who should have protected her chose their own comfort instead. But one trained protector refused to look away. When a dog chose a child over a badge, the first domino fell, and it changed everything.